Are potential MCP amendments?
I think we'll first start with guidance updates. I would like to be standing up here reporting that we finalized the vapor intrusion guidance and the AUL guidance. We haven't managed to do that yet, but in terms of priorities in the guidance realm, that is certainly what we're working on. I think we had talked about maybe staggering them and doing one AUL first and then vapor intrusion. In light of all the vapor intrusion work going on internally, we talked about not putting the vapor intrusion guidance behind the AUL, and right now we've kind of redistributed some resources to getting both documents done probably within the same time frame. So I hope we have better news to report next month. We're really focused on doing that. And I also, in terms of kicking off this discussion of the MCP amendments, I don't want to leave the impression that we're sort of moving on to something else in terms of policy development that's going to distract us from getting the guidance done. We're having this MCP amendments discussion today because it's good timing to just get that ball rolling, but really we continue to focus on finalizing the guidance. We did, as you know, finalize the Lnapl guidance, I think back in February. So Ken is just going to give a brief update on some implementation to date. I know there was some training at the LSPA last meeting and some questions there and some feedback from that presentation. So he wants to cover that, and then we'll start talking about the amendments. And I just also wanted to mention, it was raised at the last meeting, the question of whether MassDEP would have some kind of guidance to LSPs with respect to the AccuTest issue with their review of data packages and issues with that. I know that's sort of an ongoing issue with AccuTest, that they've sent out letters to clients that use their lab, and they're doing their own review. But MassDEP has talked about putting together some guidance on that, so we've already met on that. I think that will come out in the form of probably a letter of some sort from Paul, and we would also look to publish an article in the LSPA newsletter, and it would address the issue of looking forward, what that would mean, and also looking back at past data packages and decisions made on that data and what obligation there might be to go back and review those results. So we have been initially talking about that. We don't have something yet, but we do have a plan to address that with that letter and article.
Liz, on that matter, if we were able to get, a letter from AccuTest saying that, for a particular project, they reviewed the data file, they'd already done some review of the data files, and, it was compliant, or it wasn't problematic, or whatever the right way to phrase it is, to kind of submit that, to the department for that site. Would something like that kind of put to rest any questions regarding that site?
Probably that would be very, very direct and helpful in that matter. I think we still just want to talk more generally about providing guidance. I think it would all come down to sort of a data usability issue, but if that information came back to you and it was sufficiently detailed to reassure you that it was relevant to the analysis that they did, I'm sure that would go a long way toward that. But I think we haven't really talked about the details of what our statement would be. So, that all sounds reasonable, but it's a little premature to say. Larry?
Given Eileen's hypothetical she's come up with, I'm trying to think of what else you need besides the lab going back and looking at
We probably wouldn't need anything else. All I'm saying is I just want to step back and not say more on this issue till we have a little more time to talk about it. Susan?
I just want to make one statement. I know you don't want to say any more, and I do respect the lab going back and checking, but that's that's not an external verification. The lab committed fraud. So then going back and checking, that's okay, because you do want to know what is the time frame. Maybe your samples weren't analyzed within that time frame of these issues, and that's one step. But there may be more that's needed from an external point of view, because you see what I'm saying here?
Right.
It's the person, it's the company who committed fraud policing themselves. That's not always a good thing.
Right,
So just
which
putting
is-
it out there.
Which is why these kind of issues would be what we looked at. So, and whether that would be sufficient or not would be something we would try to provide some guidance on. And we DEP aren't doing this ourselves. We're getting some help in terms of what would be appropriate response. Oh, yeah. So.
Okay, well, as Liz said, the guidance for Lnapl actually went final in February, and it's never too soon then to talk about implementation. Not a lot has happened, but a couple things to point out as people start down the road, and there's been a few of you who've done it. Who here went to the LSPA training on March 10th? I imagine a lot of you did. If you didn't, I understand the slides are on the LSPA website in the members area. There might even be streaming audio or video there too. I recommend looking at it. It's really good. Not for my part, but mostly for Matt Young's part and Steve Gato's part. My part was nothing new, nothing I haven't said already to you guys 1,000 times. But Matt gave a client perspective, and Steve gave a really excellent case study on using not just transmissivity. He is an ASTM transmissivity instructor, but he's also did an excellent case study using the multiple lines of evidence approach. A couple points to clarify that questions that have come up in the training and with other people. When I spoke last time here, I think the slide was misleading. My words I don't think were, but the slide was misleading, that it indicated, or seemed to imply that there was guidance within the document on exposure risk, and that is wrong. The guidance still lacks how to determine Lnapl exposure risk. It's not in there. We know it's a hole. It's a comment that we've gotten for years as we've gone through this, and it's a higher level of effort than we had anticipated from the beginning. And it's at the point now where we're probably going to have to subcontract the work out, but it is an important area of work that will be included in a future update. Another question that came up during the training, actually, those of you who were there, do you remember the discussion about is it possible to achieve a permanent solution in a GW1 area because of Zone 2 and Aquifer Protection District? Who remembers that? And unfortunately, I think we sort of moaned back and forth about it, and I think I incorrectly said, no, you're right, I don't think you can do that. But Liz and I went back and looked at the 2014 amendments to 400924, and it actually does allow it. That one line in there that originally said you can't exceed a ½ inch has been replaced with as long as the new requirements in 1003 are met. So in other words, you can have measurable Lnapl in a well or at the site and still achieve a permanent solution in GW1 because of Zone 2 or of an Aquifer Protection District. So take a look at that. Other than that, I've had a number of conversations with folks who've called me, both DEP staff and a number of you to talk about, their site and what the situations that they have. As we expect, there's a lot of questions about transmissivity, and I think that's going to be an issue that's going to remain because transmissivity is such a key number and a key parameter, especially in the simplified approach. And then just general case studies as we talk through people's sites, saying, hey, I have a site, it's old, I have limited TPH data, it doesn't seem to be a thickness problem except maybe once a year. What do you think? And so one of the things that I keep pointing people to, and I know those of you who've read the guidance, by the time you get to the back of it, you're probably burned out. But in the back, we use this all the time, and Steve Gato used it in the training the other night, that screening matrix that lists across the top the performance standards and along the side lists the lines of evidence. And this is where Steve went through item by item almost, and he filled this matrix with green check marks, saying these are the lines of evidence that he evaluated based on to meet these performance standards listed above. And it was pretty cool. And I expected him to be talking mostly about transmissivity because he is one of the transmissivity gurus out there, and he certainly nailed that part of it. But he also filled in a good, dozen or so of these other boxes with green check marks. So it was really, really good. The case study has measurable quantities of Lnapl left behind, but he went through a whole multiple lines of evidence approach, concluding that the site meets the requirements of a permanent solution. The second thing I point people to is on the next page in the back of the guidance document is this checklist. And again, it's the type of thing at the back of the document, you probably haven't even really thought about it or looked at it, but now that we're implementing this policy, when I talk to staff, when I talk to you guys, the questions I ask, I'm not thinking off the top of my head, I'm basically looking at that list. Those are the questions to ask. How old is the site? What kind of Lnapl is it? Do you have TPH data? You think you're closing out? Okay, how do you know you don't have microscale left behind? Have you recovered to the extent feasible? How do you know that? I mean, these are just it's not 100% comprehensive. There's lots of other questions maybe you could be asking. But if you ask yourself all of those questions, I think you'd be well on your way to deciding and evaluating using your professional judgment if the performance standards have been met. So again, the matrix and the checklist, the two last pages of the guidance document will bring you back through the document in the bottom line box checking manner that I think people really most want. As far as next steps, where we're going from here, if you haven't already, again, look at the LSPA website for the training slides from the other night, where there's talk about we're going to repeat it in somewhere in the Western region sometime in the next month or two, I hope. It's really good. It's only an hour of credit. I think we went over by about 20 minutes. It was pretty packed, but it was very helpful. We had a lot of positive feedback on it. Future reg changes. Liz is going to be talking about that for sure. I think there's a handout to do with that. As far as it affects Lnapl, one of the reg changes obviously is to explicitly state in the reg the half-inch trigger for an AUL. And then, as I've said many times before, the guidance itself, I see it as something that will be updated, regularly, especially the references at the back and the hyperlinks. And that ties into the new ITRC team, the Lnapl update team, which I know a couple of you guys are signed on as industry partners with. And they cover, it's been 5 years since they've had an Lnapl team, and they're going to cover topics updating the science. There's going to be a lot of emphasis on transmissivity. There's also going to be overlap with things like exposure, things like vapor intrusion, those types of other issues that there's other teams we're doing work on. But it's basically a really good group, probably about 60 people strong now throughout North America that are on this thing. So it's worth checking that out, and they're on the web as well. And that is it for now, unless anyone has any further questions about that. I know there's a lot to cover.